So then we are back with more understandings from the time of the second tabernacle services, where we find in the Aramaic English translation of the word. This translation comes from the original manuscripts of the prophets of the Italic lineage. So then we can understand the time of the end as per the Yeshayahu the prophet. Then we find many understandings of the 61st chapter. Firstly, then, obviously the Messiah was completing the spring feast. And then, later, he did not read regarding the vengeance because it was related with Revelation or then Galah, regarding then autumn feast. Then, we find also the time of restoration, where the holy cities of the Messiah laid waste for many centuries would return. So then, could we understand then the plan of the Creator? Can the world then, obviously, lined up with the great plan of the Creator? This is the main point. So then, from the time of the seat, from 1009 to 2009, where we find then the time of the seat, and prior of this time until the birth of the Messiah was the reign of the Messiah of 1,000 years. The question is, can the world line up before the Creator? So then comes the Creator. Nice and easy, He is very smart, He is the best, and the world cannot beat His holy plan. The question is, can the world then come and line up with His holy plan? So this is what we set ourselves for. Could we then, rather than hurting other people, understand the basics of mathematics? There are some countries smart, some countries are not smart. Some countries do understand economics, some countries do not understand economics. So then, what has then the Creator said regarding then taxes? So then, you find the Messiah then completing the spring feast. What is the spring feast? They trained for more than 1,000 years, the spring feast and autumn feast. Amongst these feasts, you find then, for instance, the unleavened bread. You find then the feast of the tabernacles, then the shofars. So if you read in Leviticus the 23rd chapter, you understand the holy feasts or holy mikras. So comes the Creator, very wisely. He is on the right side, always. Always loving, always understanding, but always precise, never made a mistake. He is Creator of the heavens and the earth. Could then the world line up themselves before His holy plan? Can we beat Him? Absolutely never. And then understanding the time of the seat. The world yet is clung very much to the time of the seat, at least in a great portion of the world. We've come out of the time of the seat in 2009. After 2009, the world then has come out of the seat and then back to the time of the Creator's calendar and agenda. What do we understand as far as His agenda is concerned? Time of the Yeshayahu the prophet, explaining the returning of the holy cities of the Messiah laid waste for many centuries. As we understand then, the Creator does not want anything to do with the time of the seat. Read the scripture. Where do you find absolutely certainty of this fact? Read Yeshayahu the prophet, 61st chapter, Ezekiel 38:5. Plus read 2 Corinthians 11:4. Understand then the originality of the scripture. So as we understand, churches do not exist. This concocted theory of salvation outside of the tabernacles is simply lunacy. Where do you find in the prophet? So let's reverse the situation and ask, where do we find in the prophecy or in the prophets the Messiah would come, complete the spring feast, and would give a license to sin? Where do you find in the prophets? Because as we understand, Leviticus the 23rd chapter gives you then the understanding of time, prophecy, and then the relation with the shadow prophetic events of the future. The feasts are the substance of themselves. The feast they trained every year for 1,000 years. So then later we find the shadow prophetic events. How do we determine? Very simply. What has the Messiah done thus far? He has completed the spring feast. Where do we find the relation with the spring feast? Leviticus, the 23rd chapter, 1st verse until the 21st verse. That's where the spring feast is at. Then we find the 22nd verse of the 23rd chapter of Leviticus. What does it say? Don't cut the corners of the field, because the Gentiles would be included in the plan of salvation via tabernacling, not via crazy churches. Churches do not exist. You can't find a relation with the Messiah completing the spring feast and give anybody license to sin. If you read the holy instructions, then the set apart would have to abide by certain understandings of the scripture, so as the strangers. So there was no exception back then. There is no exception during the time of his completion of the spring feast. So there is no exception during the time of the Gentiles. So there is no exception during the time of restoration, and won't ever have any other exception. So where do we find the prophets license to sin? Because God knew that people would sin. Sin is related with tabernacling. Plan of salvation. First, then, the set apart were saved out of Egypt. Were there in Egypt then many plagues, 10 plagues? No, they never existed. What those were dreams Pharaoh had. So then, as Moshe went out and he was in search for the lost animal, there he was there in the mountains trying to find the animal. Obviously he got tired. He had taken a nap. He had an understanding in his dream. Thus the burning bush. It was not a natural fact. It was a dream. He woke up after the nap. Then he knew what to do. He had to visit with Aaron, his brother. From then on, they went down to Egypt. He got there, he spoke with Pharaoh, and he said, "Are you going to let the people go?" "No, what are you talking about? This night you're going to have a dream. This is what you're going to have in your dream." Pharaoh obviously said, "Get out of my presence. You are speaking garbage." Well, no problem. He turned around, was under guard. But then Pharaoh began to be a bit concerned with it, so he went to rest. And during the night he had then a dream. In his dream he had this strange vision. Then he got up in the morning and he was afraid, and he said, "Moses, what is this? Are you going to let the people go?" "No, this night you're going to have this dream. Get out of my presence." But then he was a bit more concerned than before, twice more concerned. Then he went to bed. He had precisely the dream that Moshe said he would have. He got up in the morning, he was despaired. "Moshe, what is this?" And the third, until the 10th. In the 10th dream, even Nahashatan had to come around and say, "If you do not let my people go, Nahashatan is going through your land, and then your firstborn is going to be destroyed," and so on and so forth. And then he had it. So then Pharaoh said to Moshe, "What you have said in the court, you are going to say amongst the people." And he was under guard. So when he spoke those understandings, some people were enlightened, some people were not enlightened. Those who were enlightened, they had to come out of there by faith or believing what then Moshe had said regarding the Creator. Contrary to what the scoundrelized scripture teaches, because then the whole nation came out of Egypt, and then the nation was plundered, and then they had to take the spoils with them. It's garbage. Those who were enlightened came out of Egypt. Those who were not stayed behind. There are studies showing roughly 600,000 people came out of Egypt. The rest of them stayed behind. Then you understand. Oh, you understand. How then Pharaoh had enough people to muster an army? How could you muster an army then if you had the entire country devastated? You have to be really stupid if you don't understand events. You know, you can't destroy the nation and then have an army at the end of it. So the mind already is going to spin. And then this jargon, you know, people going out of Egypt and then going through the Red Sea and then stretch out your arm. That's garbage. There was no stretching out of arm of any kind. There were no miraculous exit from Egypt. When they came out, the sea was already retrieved. They came straight through, nice and clean sand, went to the other side, went to the desert. And then afterwards, Pharaoh then came to his senses. He perceived he was then deceived. But he was not truly deceived. Those dreams were true. Because the Creator, He is not going to bring judgment upon a nation without first understanding His holy instructions. So they came out of Egypt, came through the Red Sea, no problem. There was no parting of the sea, you know, and then this huge column then of fire prior of, and then separating Egyptians from Hebrews, and then, you know, came out of, you know, the hub of the wagon of the Egyptians, and it's garbage. The whole scenario is a novel. There was nothing of the kind. The people, they were not yet ready to understand who the Creator was. Any supernatural fact they would give credit to the gods they were used to. They were more than 400 years in a pagan land. Do you think they would understand how the Creator would work? You have to be really stupid if you believe it. They were as Egyptian as the others. Pagans, they were the scoundrels. And then you are going to believe that they had an understanding of the Creator when they did not even know who He was. As far as what they were understanding, what was then Moshe explained. The Creator had told him to go over there and bring them out. And sure enough, they came out. Then afterwards came Pharaoh, then went through the Red Sea, but then was the time for the sea to return to its path. Then they went to the other side, then they got lost in the desert for quite some time, then they couldn't find the Hebrews. By this time, then the sea was already returning. You know, there is a name for it. When the sea returns to its level, means high tide. Have you ever heard of it? Some people understand more the basics of high tide, low tide, but then they understand when nations are destroyed, then afterwards they have enough strength then to get an army mustered. You know, there is a bit of stupidity in the center of it. So then low tide, high tide. So when they returned, then they did not understand, but then the sand over there was already slushy. Can you imagine what it means for a horse coming through with those wagons over there and the high velocity going through those mushy sands, you know? They stick their legs there so far down that it breaks. Horses have extreme power. It was such a confusion then, back then, they died. They simply died. Then the rest of them went on. But can the world today understand? Is the Creator then being smart, being great, being the first, always gentle, always understanding, versus the world? Can we line up with His holy plan? So can the Creator, the most important of the heavens and the earth, Creator of the heavens, Creator of the earth, can we line up with His holy plan? Can we beat Him? Absolutely never. That's a factor we must never do. But can we line up with His holy plan? As we understand, there is over there already in the East, Chinese system is coming through, where the middleman is gone. Let me give you a secret. Did you know the Creator does not admit lazy people? He absolutely abhors lazy people. You know what politicians are? They are lazy people. Because when you understand tabernacling, people, they know how to govern themselves. They don't have to have politicians. So when we understand tabernacling, we then earn from the Creator the ability of governing ourselves. Doesn't have to have a government. In fact, the nation should be guided by a prophet, as it was during the time. But then, because of choices, then obviously, then the people want to have a king, and then by the time of the Messiah wasn't a holy sitting because it was so mixed up, then the Creator determined, give it to the government what belongs to the government, and to God, God's. Pay your taxes. But let me give you this certainty, He abhors lazy people, and politicians, they are always lazy. That's why then the freighters are going to be in charge and the politicians are going to be absolutely out of job. Because they are lazy. You know, watch our politicians in the U.S. government. They do nothing. Some of them don't even show up for work. You know what they do, most governments? They simply ask a friend, you know, to push the switch there when they are doing the voting. They don't even show up anymore. It doesn't mean the Creator condemns those people, because they are already condemned, but His Son has provided tabernacling, not church. Church is junk. Church came around because people were not paying taxes, yet they were having relationship with the holy cities after the time of Yohanan. And then they thought they were so pious, they were so religious, they thought they should never pay taxes because all those kingdoms are evil. Why are we giving our money to those people? And the Messiah said, give to the government what belongs to the government. Then what they used to do? They would come around congregations. Welcome to the congregations. It's not tabernacling, it's congregation. Congregation is synonymous of scoundrels if they don't pay taxes. precisely what it was. Then they would come around, gather around, talk about what they had over there in mind and what they did, and trade and making money and blah blah blah. And then the country's not receiving taxes. And the Messiah said many years before, pay your taxes. Then the kingdoms would come around, those congregations of scoundrels, and would catch those people in the act, speaking of their dealings, their dirty schemes. And they, could you include myself in it? Of course, we have done this, and you know why we're not going to pay taxes. Oh, that's great, it's more money in your pocket, isn't it? Well, of course, then every man of jack of you in jail, because you are then not paying your taxes. And they had no clue, they were speaking with tax inspector. Welcome to the financial world. That's how financial institutions were born. But wait a minute, we can give you, you can take the taxes, but, we give you this much, but then you take 90% for yourself of the taxes, and then we can make a deal with the situation. Then you give a portion to the government, a portion stay with us, and then a portion you have for yourself. That's the middleman. That's how it was generated. When there is no tabernacling, people must have a sword in their necks so they won't infringe on somebody else's rights. If we understand what the Messiah said, pay your taxes and understand tabernacling, everything's fine. But we think we are smart, and we are not deducting taxes as we should have, and that's why our government then is bankrupt. So then comes the Creator with His holy plans. Can we match up to His plans? That's the main question. Because it's not only coming down hard on people, it's understanding, the Creator has a sense of humor. Contrary of what we think of Him. And He likes a bit of competition. Well, understand, He wins every time. But can we match up with His plans? That's the point. Can we beat Him? Absolutely never. Can we match up with His plan? He is already at the finish line without starting the race. Isn't that interesting? So we understand, comes a system from the east where the middleman then is removed. That's why retailers are out of work. We understand governments are going to be working in skeleton state. Governments, if they are not taxing instantly as the Messiah told them to do, they won't have money to pay their people. That's a very scary part of it. Because whatsoever relates with the government expenses is related with the charging of taxes. That's why the Messiah, when he was then, in quote, thrown in the midst of religious people and the governors or then the leaders of the governments of the time, the Creator intervened. Because this factor was not then posted on the Holy Instructions. Holy Instructions teaches then they set apart, they must be guided by a prophet. And prophets are only then in charge when the instructions are not obeyed. Because when they obey the instructions, they self-govern themselves. That's why then the Creator during this time of restoration, He does not want anything to do with deceit. New World Order, that's junk. Understandings of the time of deceit, it's junk. Mid-man is junk. He wants people to work, earn their money, understand tabernacling, and pay their dues. And that's why He has then wisely managed the world situation, so then when the era breaks and United Kingdom divides, then the Chinese system comes. It is absolutely timed perfectly. Because the Creator is going to show who He truly is in charge. Not by demanding, not by forcing, not by churchy junks, congregation of scoundrels, not paying taxes. He's going to do it very cleanly. And thus far, He's on time. And He has shown via facts in the Scripture, the next 36 months is going to be it. A lot of situations taking place at the same time prior of the starting of the autumn feast. So then, after 2009, we've entered in the time of the dragon. That's why when you read then Galad, the 20th chapter, you find many names of the adversary, or Nahashatan. You find him as a serpent, you find him as a deceiver, you find him then as a dragon, you find him as adversary. Each of those, they have a specific understanding when relates with the times and seasons. So then we understand what it means, the Gentile layer of understanding. Thus far, we lived during the time of deceit. From 1009 to 2009 was then devil. We are no longer during the time of devil. You know what devil means? It means slanderer, mocker. We are no longer during the time of mocking and slandering. We are during the time of precision. Knowledge increased. Computers are available. The knowledge base is extremely high, so people, they can understand in precision. So we are in a Gentile level at the dragon's layer of understanding. In a world, in a Gentile level, there is no person wiser than the dragon. Get used to it. Because God is always more than the devil. We are not during the time of the devil, we are during the time of the dragon. But then, because the world is in sin, and we must understand tabernacling, then there is a leader in a world's layer, and it's not the Creator. He's got nothing to do with the leadership of the Gentile level. The only situation he's related with is showing the world who he is. In quote, the orchestration from behind the many aspects of these earth and governments and trade at the same time, understanding the instructions, the prophets, the writings, then spring feast, autumn feast, restoration, every of these areas at the same time, perfectly needed. So then, because of the high precision times we are at the moment, we understand there is a higher being at work. But he does not have any relation with the Gentile leadership. That's why he has chosen a neutral system where the midman then, you know, the inspector over there, they became a scoundrel. He's removing the scoundrels out of the work area so then he can show tabernacling. We never heard these before. Tabernacling. Go around the world to the foreign form holy tabernacling. Then you understand 2 Corinthians 11:4. If any comes to you, any person comes to you, and teaches you another kingdom or another gospel, another spirit, another religious understanding, then where the tabernacling is not included, then you have the false Messiah. So the main factor is, where do we find in the prophets, in the holy instructions, a non-tabernacling status? There is only an answer: during the time of deceit. That's why when you read Galah, what Galah means, the revealed ones. You find in 1,000 years of the Messiah, where then tabernacling was then directed by the Creator Himself, teaching His people. Then the Messiah then had his objective of having Gentiles saved via tabernacling. But it must maintain then the line of completion of the first, so then the second takes place. But then if you don't take the time to study the Scripture, then how are you going to understand it? The Messiah said, you then search the Scriptures diligently. Make sure these are then true. And have you ever had this condescending spirit? You know, people that are ignorant as far as the Scripture is concerned, but always condescending. Always thinking themselves higher than the situation, even above the Creator Himself. Disgusting people. Absolutely disgusting. That's why then Shaliach Shaul said, at the end of times, they would concoct for themselves teachers with itching ears, teaching junk. Our country is repleted with these pastors, junkies, some of them teaching for 50 years, garbage. Because they don't understand tabernacling. Disgusting, and they have this condescending spirit. First, if a person is a foreigner, then a secondary. Second, a person does not understand God because they have some sort of a perception of God, though our country is bankrupt. Third, then whatsoever is speaking other than what they think God is, nobody knows His name. They understand there is a title of Lord, but those are titles given to the British landowners of the time. They don't even know His name, but they have this condescending, powerful presence while the country is bankrupt. Not only this, when we understand it for the next 36 months, then there is over there in the Ozarks, you know, the new capital of the country, because the country is going underground like reptiles, rats. But they continue with their condescending spirit. It's truly disgusting. Huh? Do some research. You know, some people don't research because they are afraid of what they're going to find. Because they don't want to admit themselves being wrong. That's why they always have this condescending spirit. Because it kind of protects them from finding the truth, so they have to make adjustments in their lives, understanding then the true Scripture. And then they think they are inferior. Because they were always indoctrinated in the junk of this country, where people then they go bankrupt. Traditions of, you know, from generation to generation, clinging to those old junks. So then, the main factor, can we match up with the Creator's plan? The system of the East is coming, like it or not. Then comes to the Pacific. The nations of the Pacific, they're already lining up. There is no middleman. When the time comes, you download in your computer, you do a direct trade with China. There is no middleman anymore. You know, the pair of pants you used to go around the corner over there to get for 20, you get for 10. Same brand. And then, no freight sometimes. Delivered at your home. Ah, but it's a speculation. You're not sure. Oh, of course. So let's evaluate the house bust in 2008. Why didn't the Chinese decide to buy those junky mortgages for? Now let's evaluate, because you have to understand, nations, they are rich because they are smart. Because they watch their resources very closely. They don't go around the world and buying junky mortgages. But we thought we were smart. And they bought the system. So then we find the Bank of China linking up already with HSBC, Citigroup. We find them, they purchased these mortgage junk of the past. Nobody knows why, but then we know because of the system can be adapted to their very own. That's the Creator already showing up with His holy, majestic plan. But then because we are so condescending, rather than understanding the hand of the Creator, we think then we can come up with a plan that makes us even higher. Disgusting. Pride goes before destruction. So then, let's evaluate the system then coming from the east. We find then New Zealand, very wisely, they are already updating their system. They are lining up their government because of this system coming through the Pacific. They are very acquainted with the ways of the Asians on how to do trade. And where do we get this understanding from? Isn't that from Shaliak Shaul, going through Asia Minor? First, then teaching the set apart, then forming holy cities, and then a relationship in Asia Minor over there. The holy cities teaching, the kingdoms of the world. There is no record of it. Oh, there were many records. They were burned. Alexandria Library. Those were then the records of the nations then simply understanding the holy city and how to do trade. Nahashatan knew, boy, if these documents remain intact, then he couldn't deceive the world. Because he knew his time to deceive the world was coming, and then he would have 1,000 years. So he decided then to get the library over there burned. So then the system comes from the east, and the nations of the Pacific already making sure they have their systems lined up. China already invited Australia to do more trade with them. China already has then friendship very strongly with the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union is already in charge of the G20, also the BRIC. Brazil, Soviet Union, India, China, establishing already a closer relationship, and then already linked up with the East, and we in this part of the world wallowing around in the same garbage. It is incredible. We are watching then the world lined up themselves for the system where you find then the North, or the Kingdom of the North, wisely already linking up, already in charge of the G20, already in charge of those countries, Brazil, and then Soviet Union themselves, and then India, and then China. China already having relationship with the Northern Kingdom. We understand already Africa is the Southern Kingdom, because Africa used to be in charge, the king of Nubia. That's why then you find the land of Cush, the first tabernacling, because of the Southern Kingdom. Africa is extremely rich. Must have tabernacling over there, otherwise they destroy themselves. Must have a direct relation with the Creator Himself via His holy city, otherwise the entire continent destroy itself because of the abundance of riches. Establishing the relationship of the first son and the second son. Then we find the neutral system of China coming through the Pacific. And then the area of the world where there is deceit, the European Union was a pure deceit. What has then Daniel the prophet stated, the nations would come together and try to adhere to each other, and they would not. The Eurozone is breaking. The United Kingdom concocted during the time of 1,000 years of deceit because it had no tabernacling during the time. Tabernacling was gone. Had to have a new world order. Then Daniel said, and the kingdoms would be divided. Because when this Chinese system comes through the Pacific and then makes itself neutral from nation to nation, any subsystem related with themselves is going to be imbalanced. Because each of those countries, they are going to do trade with the main system, very profitable. They are not going to pay their dues. Because they deduce, we have the subsystem, we have a linking already with ourselves as a country, but then we have this great system of the Chinese where we can always earn any money. We simply invest and we earn, we invest and we earn, so why are we going to pay our dues if we are linked up with nations of the subsystem and they are very rich? Well, let they take care of the dues of those weak countries. Causes imbalance. What do you think is going on with Cyprus? They are part of the European Union, the Eurozone. They're not paying their dues. But certainly they don't want to share any of their natural resources. There is some sort of a bond, or the European Union is giving them some sort of exchange for their natural resources and such, but then when the system comes, then they are going to simply say, our deal was during the time of these bonds, but we are no longer having these kind of bonds because we have changed the system of our country from these bonds to the new system of the Chinese. We want then our country to run through the Chinese system because it's very reliable. We no longer have any ties with your bonds or with your countries or European Union way of doing finances. So we are not going to pay our dues. Causing imbalance. That's why the Eurozone must be broken, and United Kingdom must be also broken. Because they are not going to pay their dues either. So let's evaluate what goes on. We understand United Kingdom, they have how many? 10 plus 5 realms. People think, for instance, Australia, New Zealand, Jamaica, Fiji, and many other realms. Those are not countries. Those are realms. It's understandable Lady Elizabeth has limited power over those nations. Not truly nations, but realms. Then the system comes very wisely and they begin to download in their computers. Then comes a time where they have to pay their dues. Services of the country, for instance. But then the country is so far behind their expenses, they take those resources for those areas and they're going to invest. Then they're going to say, we are part of the United Kingdom. Since they are strong, let them come and take care of it. It's going to cause imbalance. That's why what then the prophet said is true. Kingdoms must be divided. But then we find precisely then Africa is already taking for themselves, they're going to be then the southern kingdom, extremely rich. Northern Sudan, the first holy city. Then we find on the north, the Soviets already in charge of the BRIC. Then we find China already with its plan of coming through the Pacific with the system. And then we find Europe entangled, and we find then our country, or the North America, absolutely lost. Isn't that amazing the way the Creator works? The Creator is amazing. You know, the European Union tried to cling to those 1,000 years of junk. North America clinging to those junks. And if you read the scripture further, if you would remove your condescending spirit, you begin to watch the Creator already working in the north, you watch the Creator working in the south, you watch the Creator working in the east, watch the Creator working through the Pacific, coming through, and then while European Union, because they thought they were so smart, you know, Tower of Babel over there, that halfway building that they used for symbolic understandings of their own, well, it didn't work. And the whole European Union got themselves entangled. North America, we are the false prophet. We believe the Messiah outside of the Holy of Holies. No tabernacling. Find ourselves bankrupt. Watch our government, always going around pointing fingers, doing the same thing, expecting another result. So we find North America then, you know, wallowing around. We find European Union wallowing around. Couple of knuckleheads. But then we find the Pacific organizing themselves. We find then, at least we got, what was the latest news? London, the BBC. Great famous media founded in 22. Already updating their system and linking up with the Pacific very wisely. He was on the radio last night. But then because of our condescending spirit, we get ourselves blind because of deceit. But then the world, from the perspective of the Creator up there, it's another type of world. So the race is on. Panic is coming. Comes the Creator very wisely through the east. And then obviously when the Chinese system is available for downloading, then absolutely customs are going to be in panic. Government in panic. They can't pay their people. Federal people won't get paid. States people won't get paid. They are not charging taxes enough. Parcels coming through from a system they have no idea how to control it. Ships lining up at the dock, no idea how to manage those mountains of packages. Absolutely panic everywhere because the government doesn't know how to govern. Expecting then, you know, black boats or then ships or clandestine ships parking themselves any other than ports because, you know, they don't do their job. And people must have their parcels. So then we find the great freighter, the UPS, then obviously is going to have a say at the end. Because of a condescending spirit of clinging to the old junk. It does not mean we are unkind. So if you think you can get a hold of some sort of area of, you know, a toehold to get yourself with your condescending spirit further plans regarding the time of deceit, you best forget it. The Messiah said precisely, give to the government what belongs to the government. He expects nations then to charge taxes properly. What would be a fair amount? 10%. Where do we find 10%? Ibrahim, when he came after the spoils, he gave 10% to Melchizedek. Melchizedek was then a non-Hebrew king and priest of the Most High. He gave 10%, symbolizing then a person of the Gentile level of the world plus tabernacling. And a very distant understanding of tabernacling, we find 10%. You give 10% to the government, 10% you give God. Closes your obligation. The rest of it is yours. 80%. 80% is a lot of money. So the question is, can we match up then with the Creator's plan? Because thus far, the North is already taken care of. The South, they already have an understanding who they are. The East is coming through very strong. The South then is part of the BRIC. And then we find the Soviet Union in charge of the G20 for quite some time. And then we find the European Union entangled up. We find North America entangled up. So then either we straighten out ourselves and line up ourselves with the Creator, or then we go bankrupt. But can we match up and avoid the panic coming in the future?